Hi, I'm Abubakar, Developer Evangelism Program Manager at GitLab. And in this second part of the two-part series on how to install set up the GKE Autopilot cluster, we'll be looking at how do you integrate an Autopilot cluster with GitLab. In the first video, we saw how to install GitLab itself on the GKE Autopilot cluster. Now, there are two ways to integrate GitLab with a cluster or any Kubernetes cluster, using certificates or using the Kubernetes agent server. Now, the Kubernetes agent server takes the approach of infrastructure as code or GitOps, where you configure the cluster to be able to listen to GitLab and receive deployments. That way you don't, this is relevant for scenarios where your developers don't have, or the people configuring your GitLab instance don't have cluster admin privileges to your cluster, or you are not comfortable exposing details around your certificate and other things publicly. This is also useful for people who have their cluster within a private network where GitLab cannot necessarily connect to it. But in this case, they can pull jobs, they can receive jobs from GitLab. Now, but for the purpose of this video, we'll be integrating with GitLab using certificates. So that is, your cluster is publicly accessible, and you can create cluster admin privileges in the default namespace and obtain the certificate and tokens necessary to configure GitLab. Now, one consideration you need to take note when working with GKE Autopilot is the kube system namespace is managed. You cannot do anything in the kube system namespace. So anything you need to do while configuring your cluster will have to be in a different namespace or in a default namespace. Now, let's see an example of how to do this. Now, first, I have a sample repository that I've prepared to work on this. It's just a simple Ruby app that displays hello world. Now, let's see what it looks like and what it does. It has a script, it has simple Ruby code with all the necessary tests, and all it does is hello world. Now, let me introduce you to AutoDevOps. AutoDevOps is a GitLab feature that allows you to just push your code, nothing else. Then it automatically uses a set of templates of CI files to test your code using Cloud Native build packs. Now that is, it checks whether your code already has tests to run. It tests the code, it packages it, it builds your code, it packages it, and deploys your code automatically without you having to write a single CI file. This is one of the great features that GitLab comes with. Now, all you need to do to enable that is just to come to your settings for the project, go to CI/CD, and enable AutoDevOps. Ordinarily, it should be enabled by default, but if your organization has disabled it, you can enable it here. But first, for AutoDevOps to work, you need a cluster, you need a runner that can do Docker and Docker builds, because at this time, AutoDevOps builds Docker images with Docker in Docker. Now, I have an existing runner with GitLab runner, which is running externally to our cluster. So I will register the runner with my GitLab instance. The next thing we need to do is to go to configure and integrate our cluster to GitLab. Now, like I mentioned previously, you have two options. You can either connect to your cluster with a certificate, or you can use GitLab agent managed clusters. But for this particular video, this video will be integrated with the cluster certificates. Now, if I click on this, it will give me two options: either to create a new cluster on Google GKE, or to connect to an existing cluster. I have my existing cluster that I've created here, so I don't need to create a new one. Now, what's the cluster name? I can just give it GKE Auto-Pilot. Then I need my API URL is, now we've provided a guide for you to be able to see how do you obtain your API URL, how do you need to connect, you need your API URL, you need CA certificates for the cluster, and you need a service token. Now, here it's specified that you should create service token scoped to kubesystem. Remember, kubesystem is managed by GKE Autopilot. You cannot create anything in kubesystem. Instead, you can create this in default. So if you come to the guide here, you will see detailed information on how to obtain your URL, how to obtain your CA certificate, how to create your token. You will need to create a service account and a cluster role by name, so that you can create a cluster admin in the default namespace. The guide here says kubesystem, you should use default, or else it will fail if you try to deploy to kubesystem. Once you've done this, you'll be able to now obtain the token you need to specify for GitLab. Now, let's go back to my cluster. I already have most of this set up for the purpose of this of our session here. So let me switch back to my cluster. I think let me make sure I'm in the right cluster. Here now we have the first thing we need to obtain is our cluster URL, which is this. Now, we have environment scope. You can decide to create different environments like production or staging or testing or whichever one. But here we are specifying that it should work with any environment. Now, the next thing I will need to provide is the CA certificate. I've already copied the certificate somewhere, so it will be easier and faster for us to move. This is the certificate and the service token. You first need to create a cluster admin, and here I've already created my resource file for it, GitLab-SC. Now here I created the service account. Remember, in the default namespace, you can't create any resource in the kubesystem namespace. Now, then I'm creating a cluster role by name for the account, for the service account, also in the default namespace. Now, once you apply this, I've already applied for my cluster here. Once you apply this, you can then retrieve the token of the user. I've already retrieved mine, so it will be easier and faster for us to proceed. Let me provide token. If you want to get more information on how you can retrieve all of this, you can do that in our documentation. Let me don't have it. Let me retrieve token once more. Yeah, I want to go back to the earlier time when I did it because I would need to ensure that I'm running it in the default namespace. Remember the guide, I'll be sending a merge request for the guide shortly. The guide mentions that you should use cube system namespace, ensure you are doing it in default namespace. Now once you've done this, you can leave everything else as is and click on add Kubernetes cluster. There was a problem. Please ensure your CA certificate and token are valid. They are. So let's go to settings here, details, and expand and ensure that we have everything correctly. Yes, sometimes we have scenarios where certificates are copied with new lines. Let me open code and check if there are any new lines that have been added here. Come on, open, yeah. Why is this slow? Yeah, probably because I'm recording. This is there slow. Yep. Okay, everything seems fine here. Certificate is fine. Let's check our token. The token is supposed to be on a single line also. Come on, what's going on with okay, we need this. Oh, okay, we have new lines, so let's remove all the new lines and try again. Now we've removed all the new lines. Let's try again. Now let's put our service token here, paste, and save. Voila. See, that's one of the things you need to take note of when setting this up. Now, the next thing we need to create is a base domain name. The base domain name is necessary when, just like when we were installing GitLab on GKE Autopilot earlier, you need to specify a domain name. Here, you need to specify a domain name that GitLab will use to deploy your applications. When it's deployed on the cluster and ingress is set up, you need to be able to find a way to see your application or access the application. So this base domain name helps you to do that. So here I'll be using one of the examples that's shown to me here. When you there's a stage where you'll be provided with an IP address to link to set a wildcard A record with your DNS with this domain name once we get to installing applications. Now let's save and let's go to health. Will not be functioning for now because you need to install Prometheus. Now when we go to applications, you have a couple of options here of applications you can install to your cluster. First is Ingress. Ingress is necessary for GitLab to be able to access your application, for GitLab to be able to provision resources to your application and make it available. Then we have Site Manager to provision certificates for your application. We have Prometheus to be able to monitor what's happening within your application, and a lot of other things, including GitLab Runner. You can set up a GitLab Runner from here also. That's one of the ways where you can set up a GitLab runner. You can also set up Elasticstack to monitor your pods. You can Knative, lots of other awesome things that you can set up from here. But for this video, we'll only be setting up Ingress, Sat Manager, and Prometheus. We will not be setting up the rest. Now, I'll be pausing the video here so that I can install all of these apps. They take quite some time to set them up. Hi, welcome back. Now, as you can see on the screen here, Ingress has installed, and it has given us an IP address to use for our base domain name. We'll use this to create a wildcard DNS record that our base domain name points to. The benefit of the base domain name is any application we install within our application, within our project, subdomains gets created so that we can easily preview the application or see them launched. Now, I couldn't install Stat Manager because there was a restriction in GKE Autopilot where, let me check the error. It says mutating webhook configuration is managed and access is denied. So I've escalated this to a development team, and very soon a fix or a workaround will be published. Now, we also have Prometheus. Prometheus allows you to monitor all the pods and the nodes that are running so that you can get a live overview of how your application is performing. Now, let's see the health section now. Previously, there was no content there, but let's give it a little second. You can see the CPU usage within the cluster and the memory usage within the cluster. All this within your GitLab interface. Now, let's go to our project and to see. Now, I was in the beginning. I was mentioning about. I was talking about GitLab Auto DevOps. GitLab Auto DevOps allows you, without having to set up your CI file, you just need to push, and GitLab handles building your application, testing your application, doing all the necessary dynamic security testing, and pushing to production here on our GKE Autopilot cluster. Now, it also gives you a URL to preview your application, since we've set up the Ingress endpoint and the domain name for it to use. Now, let's see an example of one that ran while I was testing previously. Now, just by pushing our application, let's see this job, this pipeline, you would see here right from the inception, without necessarily specifying a CI file, it builds the application. What it does is it checks your project. Do you have a Docker file? If you do, it builds with the Docker file. If you don't, it uses cloud native build packs to build your application for you by identifying what programming language it's written in and building the package. It does a series of tests, security detection, license scanning, and so on and so forth, down to production. Now, production means it publishes your application on the GKE Autopilot and provides you with the URL to access it. If you remember, autopilot-demo.abango.me is the base domain name that we specified while we were integrating GitLab with GKE Autopilot. Now, if I visit this URL, remember it doesn't come with HTTPS because we couldn't install Sat Manager. Yeah, you see it shows hello world, which is just the text that is that was in the code. Now let's make a change to this. Let's go back to our project, files, and let's open with Web IDE byte within GitLab. We go to server.rb. You see there is no GitLab CI file here. Oh, okay. Let's then change this to let's, instead of hello, let's say hoi Dutch. Yeah, I'm living in the Netherlands now, so I'm trying to learn Dutch. Hoi GKE Autopilot. Then we can probably make it yeah, let's just leave it this way for now. What we'll do here is I'm trying to show you what deploy review apps is. Now, but first, let's see the different features that are available for you to use with Auto DevOps. Now, it does build monitoring, dependency scanning, like I mentioned earlier, everything for you automatically. But the key components that I want to showcase now is review apps. Review apps, when you are working within a branch, you would want to see a live preview of the change you've made first before you push to production. Review apps allows you to be able to see those changes first, make sure everything is fine before you march to master. Once you march to master in the default configuration of AutoDevOps, it pushes to production. Now, AutoDevOps is mainly a bunch of templates that have been created for you to use. You can retrieve the code, the template files, and change them to suit your own needs. Now let's go back to our project. We are saying hi GKE Autopilot. Now let me commit here and put it on a branch. Let's say Autopilot. Let's name the branch Autopilot, and we start a merge request. Okay, let me assign to myself and submit the merge request. Now it should start a pipeline with series of jobs that will run against this specific branch, and you will notice a difference between this and the earlier pipeline we saw. Now this is the pipeline. Let's check what the pipeline is doing. Now first it starts with the build and all the tests that needs to be done, but the new thing that is here is review. Let's see the previous one. In the previous one, the first one here, it creates a dust environment before production, before performance, but under review. But if we look at the new one, it's just review. It's not dust environment, and there's no production. It's performance. It's because we are working on a branch, and because we are working on a branch, it will allow us to preview our application first using auto review apps before it now pushes to production. After we've accepted, we've seen the changes and everything is fine, then we march to production. We march to the master branch or main branch if you've renamed your master, and it pushes to production. Now this will take a while. I'll pause the video a bit while this completes and gets to review, then we see what it looks like. Yeah, welcome back. All our tests have finished, have completed, and we now have the review job. Now let's see the logs of the review job and see it ran lots of things, installed lots of components on pods, and was able to retrieve a URL for us to dedicated just for us to review our application. Now let's click on this. See, it starts with to review Autopilot and this. Now if I click on this, it should show me the change that we made. Yeah, we don't have a certificate, so let's proceed. Now you see it shows hi GKE Autopilot. Let me zoom in so that we can see it clearly. Hi GKE Autopilot. This is just a review. Okay, we've seen probably if there's a mistake, we can correct, go back to the code, correct before we merge. And once we merge, it gets pushed to production, and this review setup that was made is destroyed. That way you can efficiently review your applications and preview everything before you actually match them to production. Now let's go back to our merge request. The pipeline will still be running since there are still a couple of jobs left. So let's see what just left, and we can simply allow it to merge when pipeline succeeds. It's just going to display the same thing on production, so there will be no need for us to wait for it to finish in this video. So let me go to my merge request and merge when pipeline succeeds. Now, that's the end of our example, but in here we've seen how you can use a GKE Autopilot cluster, integrate it with GitLab, and deploy your application. I mentioned to you previously that we have two methods of integrating with GitLab. We have, you can integrate using certificates, or you can integrate using the GitLab agent. Now, the main advantage is using the GitLab agent is more secure, and your team members that don't necessarily have access to being a cluster admin, or your cluster is not public on the internet, can use this. Now, the process of integrating this is totally different from what we've seen in this video. We used the cluster integration with certificates just for us to show how that GKE Autopilot works well, integrates well with GitLab. But if your organization requires integrating using an agent, use this option. When you click on this link, it links to the documentation to show you how you can integrate. But we also have a blog post recently written by one of my colleagues, Victor Nagy, who is a product manager on the configure team that worked on this. It shows you how you can integrate the Kubernetes agent with GitLab and be able to run your application seamlessly. The main difference between the two options is in the old option, you need to create cluster admins, which is not right for every organization. Also, your cluster needs to be publicly available on the internet. But here, what you just simply need to do is to set up the Kubernetes agent server on your GitLab installation. If you remember in the first video, we enabled it while installing using the Helm chart. Then we have Agent K. Agent K is the components that will be running within your cluster. It will be using gRPC to pull the GitLab agent server for any new job it needs to execute or anything it needs to run. So that way you can be behind the firewall and run and integrate GitLab, the GKE Autopilot with GitLab. So you can go through this, check this blog. It has a video that demonstrates how you can get this done also. Now, thank you very much for joining me in this video. I hope you get to use GKE Autopilot and use it with GitLab. Thank you.